Before I start, I just want to say happy birthday, Starbound.
Wait, are you able to kill the civilians in there?
Yeah.
Oh my god!
Why the hell does the soda here taste like dirt?
Bro, just shut up and keep drinking. I want to win the Steam Summer Race.
Your girlfriend never loved you. End of story. Alright, that's enough partying around. Let's get into this. Can you actually believe that Starbound is officially 10 years old now? I guess it's technically 13 years old now if you count the early access days starting in 2013. But if I'm being honest, I want to talk about this game today and how it's surprisingly not dead and has somewhat of a decent player count even after 10 years after its launch. And 7 years after the incident of 2019. If you're a Starbound veteran, I think you know what I'm already talking about. I'll talk about the incident later in this video. However, this video is not mostly focused on talking about the fallout of Starbound in 2019, but rather why and how it still has about 1,000 people still playing to this day. 1,000 players doesn't sound like a lot, but hey, it's surprising how there are still people playing this game after the fallout. But getting into the bread and butter of this video, you see, Starbound only had 4 major updates to the vanilla game. 1.1 with the fishing update, 1.2 with the vault update, 1.3 with the space update, and lastly 1.4 with the bounty hunter update. Over the course of 3 years after its release out of early access, we got some pretty regular content updates with this game, and it seemed like the game was just doing fine. Along with this, Starbound officially added the Steam Workshop support on release when it came out. The vanilla game was not really great, to say the least. The vanilla game will definitely seem pretty interesting when you touch the game for the first time, sure, but once you beat the game, players might begin to question things like endgame content or replayability after beating the game. Some people might even say that the beta version was arguably better than what we currently have in the vanilla version. What the beta version of this game had was things like racial armor and abilities and many survival mechanics like temperature and others. Also, I didn't know this until doing my research making this video, but apparently the story in the beta was more morbid, adding things like brain extractions and demonic crystals. When the full release of this game came out, it took all of these really interesting things and threw them out the window. What we have in the current vanilla game is nothing of value when it comes to choosing what race you want to be in the game. The only difference in choosing what your race does in the game is what your ship is going to look like, what your ship pet you get, and lastly what your armor theme is going to look like. To go into more detail about the armor, if you play as a human and make iron armor, your armor is going to look more like this. If you're going to play as a glitch in the game and make iron armor, your armor is going to more look like this. They both give you the same exact stats, but it's just a different theme depending on what your race is in the game. If you play as a Florin, your armor is going to look very tribal looking. If you're going to be playing as a Nova Kid, your armor is going to look very wild western cowboy looking. They all do the same thing when it comes to stats, but there's no really big reason to sit at the main menu and contemplate what your race is going to do for you in your run other than give it a cosmetic theme rather than a gameplay advantage of some sort. Now, some of you might argue that's not a bad thing, but to be fair, if I'm playing an open world game with the option to play as a different race, you would kind of think what your race would do in terms of having an advantage or disadvantage in certain scenarios. Also, they butchered the story in the full release of the game. Instead of getting an interesting story about demonic crystals and brain extractions, we got a very boring generic space story where you're one of Earth's last protectors scanning random things in a village across the galaxy from this half-pint old bitch named Esther, and then giving you a mission that was themed of what you just scanned. It's very repetitive and tedious. At the end of the game, you pretty much become Space Jesus and save Earth from becoming a giant tentacle hentai infestation. Mind you, this is for all of the races you play as in the game for saving Earth. Wouldn't it be cool if choosing your own race had its own storyline and somehow connected with all of the other races' stories? That would give the game some replayability and more insight about the lore of the game. It's such a shame, really. There was so much potential that was thrown away when they took this game out of early access. Another thing that would make this game feel more alive is the racial stats / advantages and disadvantages. Like, wouldn't it be really cool to, let's say you and a friend are playing and one of you is a Florin and the other is a Holoid. and you both stumble across an underwater Holoid city, and the person playing as a Holoid is able to swim faster than the Florin. Heck, this can tie into the world building too. Let's say the Holoid is getting treated with the most utmost respect, considering that it's a city full of other Holoids, but the other person playing as a Florin is being treated like garbage because the whole lore between the two races.
Photosynthesis, more like photo sucked his dick.
Sure, that's racist as hell, but things like that in a game can contribute to environmental storytelling and making the world building feel more alive. The vanilla game really needs work. But fret not, how people fixed all of these issues was with modding. I think one of, and if most importantly one of the main reasons why this game is still alive, is modding. People modded the game to bring all of the interesting beta features back into the game. Heck, if you didn't like some of the beta features and only wanted a certain feature to be featured in your next playthrough, I guarantee you there's a mod for that. Or even remove the vanilla game story outright. There are so many mods to this game that it unironically makes the game feel not like the full release of the game. Like Fracking Universe, Shellguard, Arcania, so many mods to fix this game. Also, modding this game's not really hard depending on what you're trying to do either. I've made mods for this game, but they're nothing as big as compared to Fracking Universe and Shellguard and other bigger mods. However, if we didn't have mods for this game would have died so long ago. If anything, this is the reason why this game is on life support. Now, I know what you might make the argument that using mods to fix an abandoned game doesn't make the game good. And to be honest, you're very right. To not get too off topic, because this kind of deserves its own video, but personally modding doesn't make a bad game a good game. Rather, in most cases, turns the game into a new game out of a bad one. Games like Starbound are a perfect example of this. The bottom line here is that modding can save bad, broken, or in Starbound's case, abandoned games to give a better game experience than its original vanilla version. It's just too bad that the Xbox version of this game can't have mods though. They promised this game would come to Xbox like 10 years ago in 2014, which is crazy because I remember I was in like middle school during this time, wondering if there was any news coming for this to the console back then. Personally, I've never played the Xbox version of this game. However, this did bring Starbound into the light of people who more than likely never heard of the game. To be fair, I think the Xbox version did a very good job at getting people's attention and bringing in more players into the game. Now, Xbox doesn't have a player count like Steam does. However, if you look at True Achievements website and look at the achievements you get in the game, it says about 31,000 people have earned this achievement, which could mean that Starbound's player count most likely soared during the end of 2024 and every now and then in 2025. Heck, this is probably the most amount of players I've ever seen since the Fallout. Now, the only problem with the Xbox version is that you can't mod it, unfortunately, which would make many people bored of the game more than likely after beating it because of the lack of replayability and in-game content. However, this more than likely made people join other communities when it comes to Starbound, like Discord, Reddit, and other platforms. Speaking of the community, it's very diverse and a lot of talented people, considering that this game is being upheld all because of the mods. You got, of course, the modders, you got the musicians for the mods, including the artists, you got players looking for people just to play with, and you got the freaky people. We don't talk about the freaky people. At the time of me making the script, there are about 14,000 people in Starbound's Discord. Mind you, there are probably more than likely other smaller groups or slightly bigger to take into consideration. But still, this shows you proof that there are a lot of people who still care about this game. Also, I feel like nobody really seems to talk about this, but Starbound seems like a perfect game to create, or at least to have an idea of an original character. If you scroll on the community content page of Starbound on Steam, you'll find hundreds of people's original characters from their Starbound playthroughs. Hell, you're looking at one right now. I was inspired by this little guy from my Fracking Universe playthrough for the first time. I remember I used to have Edward from Cowboy Bebop as my main profile pick for really anything, but that all changed when I decided to draw my character and create something original, all because I had some fun in a modded playthrough of Starbound. I know I'm not the only content creator to use a Starbound character for representation for my work. There are other people who make content big or small that use Starbound avatars for their representation, like Ace the Ocarina Maker, Suketh94, Officially Kaze, and there's so much more that I'm pretty sure I'm probably unaware of what's out there. Speaking of Starbound and YouTube, you will find a mix of playthroughs for the most part, but you'll find a mix of videos talking about the pros and cons of Starbound as a whole, videos from people like Looney Foxo and Suketh94 highlighting the game for its dedicated community, mods, and even its cultural impacts that the game has left behind. I bet most of you watching this video didn't know that this meme is actually from a Starbound stream.
My name's Drew Scanlon, and some of you may know me as the blinking white guy meme. My coworker Jeff was playing a game called Starbound, which involves farming, and he said,
so I've been doing some farming with my hoe here. I can kind of till
what
the.
kind of a? So what is that?
Or the fact that Starbound was the reason why a lot of people Steam accounts had an absurd amount of levels during the summer event of 2019. Only because people were buying the game and refunding it to make their team win in the event, all because people would mod the game and turn a piece of dirt into 1 million gallons of soda and earn points, until Valve stepped in and corrected the exploit. I personally like to call that the soda event of 2019. Hell, I bet some of you didn't know that the track from Snowy from Undertale was originally going to be in Starbound. While there are some videos like from Robocast and Progress like to highlight the game's downfall from 2019 and talk about the negatives about the game. Things like the lack of in-game content, dev drama, and worst of all, the exploitation allegations against Chucklefish and using free labor. I think it's a good time to bring up the fallout of the game since I just mentioned it here. So, I'm going to briefly go over it because Robocast, Progress, and another individual by the name of The Good Trash have made very insightful videos talking about this. But what the fallout of the game was that a man by the name of Finn Bryce, who was originally an artist for Terraria, decided to start his own indie game studio called Chucklefish. Chucklefish is both a developer and a publisher for games, but to be fair, they're more of a publisher at this point than really making their own games for the most part. They only have developed 3 games as of now, or technically 4 since they have another game coming this year called Witchbrook. However, they have published some pretty good titles like Time Spinner, Locomotive, and Eastward. They even published Stardew Valley when it was released. However, going back to Chucklefish as a developer, their first game was, you guessed it, Starbound. Starbound had a pre-order campaign on the Humble Store that raised $1 million in just under a month. However, during the development of Starbound, many young and inexperienced individuals stated that Finn Bryce was very vulgar and vile towards his workers whenever they mentioned some sort of form of compensation was brought up. It was until 2019, Chucklefish had faced allegations of exploiting several volunteer contributors during the development of Starbound and ended up profiting off of it. During all of this chaos, Concerned Ape, the guy who made Stardew Valley, had decided to cut ties with Chucklefish and publish Stardew Valley under his own name because of this. The amount of backlash was very big during the middle of 2019 when this happened towards Chucklefish. You can actually see this with the Steam player count as well. You can see here in 2019, just about 10,000 players had pretty much kind of jumped off the chart, and the player count has been around 2,000 and 1,000 on average. There's even some who debate that the volunteers knowingly entered an agreement with Chucklefish, who was a small startup studio looking for unpaid volunteer work, which caused even more fuel added to the fire to the argument. However, for the most part, most of Starbound's community views this as a huge ethical failure on Chucklefish's part. The only reason why the player count hasn't reached 0 and stayed 0 is because of modding, like I said from earlier. However, I'm going to leave off the controversial topic here. If you want to know more about it, I suggest checking out everyone's videos that I mentioned just now. I think everyone's videos that I mentioned, either talking about the game in a good or bad light, are not wrong in any shape or form. Before wrapping up this video, I just went over the fallout of Starbound. Now, I have a question for all of you. Should we separate certain devs from their games? As I've been getting older, I've been seeing a trend of really good games being made by bad developers, or some unhinged idiot in a company ruining it for the rest of the company for their game to sell recently. I don't think a gaming company's reputation should define what the game that they're making should be what it is. Sure, Mr. Finn Bryce was not very ethical towards some of the people who worked on the game. I would 100% condemn that because that's a toxic work environment from the head of a company. Although, I think a lot of people will agree that Starbound is an abandoned game that had, and arguably still has, potential that is only living up to its standards because of modders. However, if you were to have this mindset to flat out avoid getting a game all because of the company being flawed or some dumb Twitter-esque drama, you would have about no video games to play. From AAA gaming studios like Activision and Ubisoft to even indie devs like Omocat, Philfish, and even Notch. No matter what, most gaming studios are not perfect. Now, I want to be clear here, I think we should condemn behavior like harassment, abuse, bigotry, or anything that feels discriminatory. If a studio does something controversial, I think people should be entitled to their opinions, whether or not they feel like they should buy the said game or product if they're interested in it. Here, let me put this bar on the screen and give you some pretty good examples of controversies when it comes to games, either being outright terrible to straight up nothing burgers. Starting on the very far left with the outright terrible, for the example here, I'm going to use The Day Before. I think some of you probably know about this game. The controversy behind this game was that it was literally the biggest scam in gaming as of the 2020s, as of right now. What happened was that these two brothers got together and made a very well-polished MMO zombie extraction shooter game. This game looked so good that it was actually the most wishlisted game on Steam at the time. However, the studio, or basically the two brothers, were accused of genre switching. They actually took the MMO tag out of the game when it released. They were accused of asset flipping, marketing, where the pre-release trailers were literally carbon copies of other popular video games, to the point to where they just shut down their entire studio. It was a ginormous flop and a disaster. Going right in the middle of the bar, the example I'm going to use is Star Wars Battlefront 2, the 2017 release one. I'm pretty sure some of you probably know about this too, but it was the microtransactions, and it was basically a pay-to-win mechanic, and everybody absolutely hated it. It was so bad to the point to where lawmakers and basically in a bunch of countries classified it as gambling. However, EA decided to go back and remove the microtransactions and release nothing but a bunch of free content from then on out and made the game recover, and it surprisingly has about a pretty healthy player count to about like 2,000, 3,000 people on average. And then there's the Nothing Burger controversy, something like the Marvel Spider-Man Puddlegate one, where a lot of fans were looking at the early E3 showcase footage to later builds, and they noticed that a puddle was missing in a section of the game, and they were trying to say that it's a downgrade because they removed a puddle. Yes, I'm not joking, that was a thing, and it was really stupid. It's literally a nothing burger, like, just nothing. This controversy literally didn't do anything to the game. It was just a stupid, dumb uproar, but it was apparently a thing. In my personal opinion, I think Starbound kind of fits where Star Wars Battlefront 2 is on this list. The controversy, yes, was bad, but people are still willing to go back and still play the game. It wasn't super terrible to the point where it was something like The Day Before, where people just outright straight up left the game and there's nobody playing that game forever now. All in all, I think it just depends on how severe the controversy is for most people. Now, some people might say, if you're buying a game that had a controversial development cycle, are you a bad person? The answer to that is no. Buying a product doesn't reflect your morals. Here's an example that happened to me. When the game Amori came out, I remember seeing it on my Steam page and thought to myself, this game's art looks really cool and it reminds me of Earthbound a lot. Sure, I'll buy this game and give it a try. I played it and I loved everything about it. To the music, to the storytelling, to the art, everything. Out of all of the indie games that came out of the 2020s as of now, this is in my top 3 favorite indie games. Eventually, I remember seeing videos talking about the Omocat situation, talking about how unhinged she was during the development cycle for the game, and was disappointed from what I saw from her as an indie developer. But that didn't condemn me to go and spread hate for the game. Oh no. Besides, that drama from Omocat is technically a decade old, so I didn't really give too much of a shit about it, to be fair. But I will admit, the game that she and her team made was phenomenal. However, I do condemn what she was saying about little boys and children, though. Buying a game like Amori doesn't mean that you support a developer with their comfort to share their fetish. Hell, there are people who would rather recognize Amori with Omocat out of the equation. Just because people buy games from controversial developers doesn't make them bad people or make them support them in their ideals. Hell, there are a lot of people who would still buy games knowing that they have some sort of controversy behind it. Modern Warfare 2 is considered one of the best Call of Duty games in the franchise, surpassing $1 billion in sales around 10 days after its release, despite having something very controversial with a scene in the game like this.
Remember, no Russian.
People always buy Minecraft and it's one of the best selling video games of all time. But a vast majority of people know that Notch has made some very unhinged posts to the point that the whole community doesn't want to recognize him for being a part of Minecraft anymore for its 10th anniversary and onwards. Sure, he might not really own Minecraft at this point, but you have to at least acknowledge that he was definitely important of building and making this game. Phil Fish made Fez, a really amazing puzzle platformer that many people love. However, his aggressive behavior towards his fans and critics makes people want to pretend that he isn't a part of the game whatsoever due to his self-destructive narcissistic attitude. I feel like Starbound can say the same thing. People will openly hate Chucklefish, but they'll still play games like Starbound or some of their other titles. You can actually even see this with some of the mods in the game for Starbound too. There's actual mods where people have outright removed the Chucklefish logo or just silenced it as soon as you boot up the game. So to separate developers from their video games when it comes to controversies is kind of a really hard answer to say. When the 2019 allegations hit the internet, people did review bomb the game and lost a lot of players. However, there are still hundreds of players still keeping this game alive and modding it because they know that they still care for this game better than its developers did. Just because people who play Starbound doesn't mean that they support ill will or toxic work environments. The reason why I feel like I wanted to bring this up is because I think some people might be missing out on a game or a piece of media that's good and probably would enjoy it if they looked at situations like this with a more open mind. Heck, the controversy might not even be that questionably terrible, like the Puddlegate one that I was just talking about with Spider-Man. Or the controversy could just be so old that nobody really seems to care anymore. Even if it is a really old controversy, or if it's a really just nothing burger controversy, it's just better to read in between the lines and look past it sometimes. Again, if people didn't want to play a game because of something that happened during the development cycle that was controversial, they have every right to do so. And sure, not everybody's gonna like something about a piece of media just because it has good reviews and a positive reception. It really just boils down to what you like at the end of the day. And I think if you have mixed feelings or unsure how you feel about a game or a piece of media, it's best if you do your own research on how you want to go about playing or doing whatever you plan on doing with it. So yeah, that's Starbound for you. A game that's still not dead and thriving off of its modding community with a developer that doesn't seem like they're going to be doing really anything with the game. Who knows, maybe Starbound might get a No Man's Sky treatment one day. I know that's wishful thinking, but this game is still fun to play even in 2026. I know I barely mentioned this in the video, but Starbound last year actually had its source code basically become open sourced at this point, and people are now freely able to optimize and do whatever they want with the game now, and they're not limited to modding, so I figured that I just put that in here in the video as like a last second thing. But yeah, that's my 2 cents about Starbound, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.